George, I hope you'll join.
I have joined, yes.
Hear me?
I can hear you. Can you
Hello?
see me? Can you see me? Can you hear me?
What initials comes in the line below? PC, JJ, AB. Not able to identify. I think if your camera is on, I think automatically it should come.
My camera is on.
It's on.
And I can hear you. And I have my full name, George Thomas, in there.
Ah, yes. But camera, I think only GT is visible there. The camera is not on, I think.
Let me turn it off and on again. How about now?
Still not coming, I think.
All right, I'm going to dial out and come back in.
Yep, maybe a temporary problem.
Rejoin ചെയ്ത് നോക്ക് George. Deepu. Yeah, now video came. Now video is okay. Narayan sir കാണാമല്ലോ ഇപ്പോ?
ഇല്ല, എനിക്ക് മിസ്റ്റർ ജോർജിന്റെ കാണാൻ ഇത് കാണുന്നില്ല. കുഴപ്പമില്ല. You can see, no? So there's no issue.
Binu, reminding all the students that you can see him. Hello, Binu. Hello, coordinators ne കാണാവോ സാറിനെ? ആരുമില്ലേ? Hello. Aishwarya?
Sir, Miss, I can't see him.
Oh no, because
Yes.
for me he is there. A pin ചെയ്ത് നോക്കിയാ maybe just pin him. ബിനുവിന് കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ടോ ബിനു? ബിനു?
No, ma'am.
No, no. But for me it's visible. What happened?
Miss, is going to share or present another version of what the tool will look like. I know it's still a work in progress, but he's going to show you what he has created so far. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to record, because I know Carol Courtney, my supervisor, wanted to check this out.
Now what's the situation? ഇപ്പൊ കാണാവോ എല്ലാവർക്കും? Hello?
എനിക്ക് എപ്പോഴും കാണാൻ വയ്യ. ഞാൻ എന്റെ ക്യാമറ ഓഫ് ചെയ്തു.
Is it okay for all of you to see him? ആരെ കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞേ?
മിസ്, ഞാൻ അഖില, എനിക്ക് കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ട്. പിൻ ചെയ്ത് വെക്കുമ്പോ കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ട്.
പിൻ ചെയ്യണം. ആ കൺസേൺഡ് പേഴ്സൺ പിൻ ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ കാണാൻ പറ്റും.
Yes, Miss, he is visible.
Yeah. Sir, ഒന്ന് പിൻ ചെയ്യാം. നരൻ സർ, ജോർജിന്റെ പിൻ ചെയ്താൽ മതി, കിട്ടും.
നെയിം എനിക്ക് ഇത് വരുന്നില്ല. കുഴപ്പമില്ല. I think we'll start. We'll go ahead.
Okay then. Let's start, I think. Deepu, can we start? Are you okay? Hello, George?
Yes, we can start. Can you give me access to share my screen as well, to show the slides?
Yeah. Binu, please give access to sir for sharing the screen.
I am presenting the screen now, Mr. After that, I can.
Got it.
Okay. Deepu, by the time you will be sharing, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you can start.
Yes, ma'am. A very warm good evening to one and all present here. Greetings from IGS Student Chapter, Marian Engineering College, Trivandrum. As we are facing this pandemic situation, we have planned to conduct this session via online, hoping all your support and cooperation throughout this webinar. Today, we have Mr. George D. Thomas, who is a Vice President of Innovation and Strategic Initiatives, Connected DMV Managing Partner, New Urban Informatics, on the topic Reshaping Our Urbanization. So, before moving on to the session, it's time to address the gathering. As our HOD of Civil Department, Vinod Sir, is having some urgent personal affairs, he's not able to join us. So, today we have Dr. Narayanan S., Professor, Department of Civil Engineering, to propose the welcome speech. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. I think I have been going through some of the information given by Professor Vani, in which I understand that Mr. George T. Thomas, an alumni of CET, is currently involved with Connected DMV. I have tried to find out what is this DMV. I think probably he will share some light on that. The stated aims in the website is to solve complex regional challenges and deliver results that empower and enrich the lives of all. Here, I find that the public, private, academic, and community organizations have come together to collaborate with some 400 volunteers from 200 organizations. Really marvelous. And IRS, I think Inland Revenue Services, as I understand, approves the Connected DMV as an independent charitable organization. Mr. George T. Thomas is the vice president of this, charitable organization. CET alumni, 16 plus years served as partner at IBM. Some of the big famous names we see in his CV held senior positions at PSINet, Metamor, Mott MacDonald. Mott MacDonald is also a very famous company. So many things in the CV and many things, frankly speaking, I could not understand also. Mr. George T. Thomas will be talking on reshaping our urbanization. Since India is now currently into smart cities, many major cities in India have been selected for funding to be reshaped as smart cities. He'll be talking on the need of construction industry to proactively adopt and adapt and advance the new tremendous advancements in technology, engineering, and engagement models, on how the very fabric of our cities are changing or needs to change, on essential new needs the industry has to adopt. I welcome Mr. George to our college and to deliver the talk. I also welcome all the students from IGS for the understanding of Mr. George. IGS has been very active last year. So many programs. We also had an international conference, 5-day conference, in which a lot of famous and foreign speakers were also there. Very successful year last time. This year, also on the same track, we had a few programs on by the IGS, Indian Geotechnical Society, already. And this is, we are all looking forward to the talk by Mr. George. I welcome Mr. George to our college and to deliver the talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you,
Narayanan.
sir. Thank you, sir. Now I invite Aishwarya AS from MTech to deliver a brief introduction about today's speaker.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the session. The opportunity of introducing the speaker is a great privilege. I would like to introduce today's speaker, Mr. George T. Thomas. He is a thought leader and advisor to public and private sector organizations in many countries. He founded and serves as managing partner for New Urban Informatics, a boutique advisory firm providing expertise to some of the most innovative companies and governments focused on disruptive technology, analytics, and smart cities. For more than 16 years, he served as a partner at IBM in roles such as Global Director of Strategy and Markets for IBM's government Industry Vertical, Director of Smarter Cities for IBM Greater China, based in Beijing, and Global Director for Smarter City Sales, Strategy and Execution. He has successfully delivered several complex mission critical transformation engagements, which include innovative and breakthrough projects in technology, process, and people transformation. He holds a master's degree in engineering and management from Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, USA. He currently serves as a Vice President of Innovation and Strategic Initiatives for Connected DMV, a non-profit regional collaboration across Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Sir, it is a great honor to hear from you this evening and truly believe that your experience can inspire young minds today. We are very glad to have you with us. On behalf of all present here today, I welcome you to lead this session. The platform is all yours, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. And participants, please note that now the session starts. All should ensure that your mic is mute and video is off. Feedback response form will be provided at the end of the session. Ensure that you fill the feedback form to issue the certificate. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that very kind introduction. It's always odd when people introduce you and you kind of think back on what all you have done. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity, Professor Ronnie, for coming and having a chance to talk to young and upcoming minds, especially in this space. As Dr. Narayanan mentioned, I am an alumni of CET. Trivandrum is my second home. So it's really, I'm sad that I can't be there in person, but I'm glad to have the opportunity to connect with so many of you today. So if you can give me the ability to share my screen, I have a few slides that I want to go through. But I do want to try to make this conversational if at all possible. So if you have questions, please feel free to jump in, or if you're on your computer, put them in chat and I'll try to address them as we go along as well. So as soon as I get access to be able to share my screens, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Binu, have you shared, given the option to him?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Deepu, you can share the screen right now.
No, it's still showing grayed out, the button to share.
Binu, is it okay? Have you done it? Binu? Hello, Binu?
Yes, I have access now.
Okay.
Okay.
So let me get started again. Thank you again so much. What I'm going to spend some time today talking to you on is a topic that's close and near and dear to my heart. I've been in this space called SMART for about a dozen plus years in many countries, including China and India and the Middle East and, of course, Europe and the US. And I've seen our world kind of reshaped in many different cultures, many different geopolitical situations, and it is truly changing. So I'm really glad to share some of the lessons learned, some of my learnings on what I have seen as I've come through this, and hopefully that can help influence you as you're continuing your education for the most part, and as you're moving forward with the next steps of what you might want to do. So fundamentally, what the challenge has been is most of us now are moving to what we would consider an urban area. And this landscape is changing. So what we define as an urban area needs to be looked at and tasked with how, and the industry that we are in, architecture, engineering, and construction, we are tasked. We've always been tasked with how it looks. It influences what we do. It's impacted by the industries that we are in. And the very fabric of where we live, work, and play is, in our hands in many ways in what we do. And so this conversation is trying to figure out or what are the big things that's happening that's changing what this means, and what are the big things that we could do to make sure that how we reshape our urbanization is valuable for the next generation as it comes along. So let me start with the context of when this term smart has become ubiquitous over the last couple of decades. The context of smart is kind of sometimes very hard to explain because it's used by different people in different industries in very different ways. So just to kind of lay out a base ground of where I'm coming from, I thought I'd lay out what the context of smart is. So stepping back a little bit, the whole world that we are living in is in transition. There are multiple macro trends that's driving this transition. The big one that everybody seems to gravitate to is technology-led shifts. There are massive technology, engineering, business model shifts that's happening that's changing how and what and how we interact with the world that we live in. This is one big macro trend. The second big macro trend that we briefly touched on earlier is the rapid urbanization. This makes all of the technology and engineering shifts more visible and therefore more reactable. And therefore, we need to kind of figure out what that means for us as we build new cities going forward. And finally, who we are, where we live. Our demographics themselves are changing. So the needs of what we have as a population is changing, irrespective of which country we live in. So these three macro trends are shifting fundamentally what we do and how we do, what we build, how we plan, how we operate. And so I'm going to spend a good amount of time talking about these three trends. But these three trends sit on top of two other societal trends that are also very profound. One is shifting economic power. About 1,000 years ago, the bulk of the economic power was in Asia, India and China, with Europe holding up the rest. Over that 1,000 years, that economic balance shifted, and the New World at that time had no power. Now, over the last 100 years, over the last 500 years, that shift to mostly Europe and then to the New World over the last 100 years. That is now shifting back with India and China more having a balance on what world economic power means. And that is having a profound impact on our societies and the places we live in. And the other big macro trend that's happening is resource scarcity and climate change. We are becoming more aware of the impact that we are having on the earth, and we are becoming more aware and more cognizant of what we need to do for the earth. So if you take these five big things, they are affecting society as a whole, micro, macro levels, and that's impacting the jobs that we do, the industries that you're going to go into, and the work that we are going to be doing over our careers. So let's take them one at a time to try to figure out what this is. If I talk about technology, I have 3 of these slides. These are 12 that I picked for the purposes of today's audience, but there's a number of threads of things that are happening. Each one of this is a domain with master's degrees, PhD degrees, entire careers built in trying to figure out how to make any one of them work. And they all have significant impact. Many of these have happened, have significantly changed over the last couple of decades, not longer than that. I'm going to pick a couple just to kind of talk about it, but every single one of this is an entire topic of subject of a talk that we could do. A couple of quick examples just to start next generation communications. We have gone from not being able to get on a phone to now having 5G, where you can download entire movies, to having systems where you don't have to upgrade every part of your network to do it. And there are experimentations going on in 6G. There is things, the sharing economy is another big one. Things like Uber and Lyft and Ola, Airbnb. None of this would have existed 2 decades ago. But we now have completely different models in what an asset is, who uses it, and how you can upgrade it, and what the life cycle of it means. So both from a technology perspective and a business model perspective, there have been significant changes that are happening. And each one of these changes has a profound impact on the AEC industry. So let's take a couple to kind of quickly talk through. The underlying one underneath a lot of this is data. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on what that actually means to unpack it a little bit. So if you think about data, this chart that you see is primarily related around computing. So the gray bar that goes up, in about the 60s, we started with mainframe computers, size of a big room, no programming language. You actually had to code in machine or move wires around to make stuff happen. We moved to client servers, we moved to handheld devices, and then we moved to IoT devices, which is pretty much computers on a grain of sand that are everywhere, that's collecting data, creating actions, and having an ability to impact the environments that we live in. So this has been a major kind of trend in how much we have advanced the ability to understand, measure the environments that we live in. The second thing is the orange line that's coming down is how we are able to communicate the data itself. Prior to the 1990s, the internet did not exist. It was mostly scientific experiments in closed environments. The internet became public in the 1990s, and then we have gone all the way from there to now cloud computing, which means large amounts of data is now accessible for far cheaper, and therefore you can do a lot more with it. So the one other interesting thing to look at in this line is that red line that goes at the bottom of the first chart, which says big data. That has two characteristics. When we typically think about data, like even 15 years ago, when you think about data, it's data in a database or an Excel spreadsheet, which means you know what it is. So if you wanted to find out who was the prime minister of Zimbabwe in 1948, there is an Excel table sitting somewhere that says prime ministers, country, and year. And something goes in a machine and searches for it and brings it out to you. But that's because you knew what the data was. It's what we call at the very bottom enterprise data. It's traditional, it's classified, it's vetted, and it's cleaned up. And you can examine it to find out the answers that you need. But the data that we have been collecting for a significant portion of time since 2010 is what this is called unstructured data. Think music videos, think MRIs, think audio, think pictures. There is no classification for it. There is no Excel table that goes and classifies what it is. That is the bulk of the data that we are collecting, especially in IoT. So what does that really mean? That means our ability to analyze the amount of data that's coming in has to increase. That data can give you insights about the world that we live in ways that we could not imagine otherwise. So 30 years of experience, now we are starting to capture the career experience of people in machines, which means when you get into the workforce, for example, in 10 years, you could have a little bot that sits on your shoulder or on an earpiece near this thing that gives you the experience of somebody who's been in that industry for 50 years on day one to ask any questions you want. What would that do? It completely ramps up your skill level in what you're able to deliver. And this is true across every industry you think about, from skilling up people to what kind of questions you're asking and where we are trying to go. So this is a fundamental shift in why we are in the world that we are in today, because of our ability to do this. So this last one is one of my favorite pictures of all time. This is from the 1960s. This thing that they're pushing up, it's in California, is a hard drive. It's a hard drive that they're pushing up into a truck to take to a nuclear station for using as storage. This hard drive could store 5 megabytes, MB, not gigabytes, megabytes. You couldn't buy it, you had to rent it. It costs you $20,000 a month to rent. It could hold 7 pictures. So this is in the 1960s. We are in 2020. In that time, we have gone from this to having something that is 10,000 times more powerful you can buy at your local supermarket for what you might make in an hour. That's really what we have gone through. So can we imagine what we will be in another 60 years? So data, what we do with it, how we collect it, where we put it, how we use it, the things we can derive from it is fundamentally shifting our world from anecdotal, qualitative to quantitative decision making. And this is fundamentally going to differentiate what the next iteration of what we build looks like. First one was data. I'll pick a couple of random technologies to talk about. Augmented reality, VR, and mixed reality. It's affecting every industry that we can think about. In AEC, the picture on the top left is an actual kind of use case that I've participated in. It's essentially design teams that are sitting in Sydney, Barcelona, and New York City that are able to co-create that's an airport, using augmented reality and virtual reality tools as if they were in the same room to try to figure out what it is. The picture on the right is from an analytics engine that's looking at one of those buildings in there and looking at heat signatures over the course of 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, to come up with pockets of where things are going to get hot so you can redesign what the atrium looks like. And of course, the one at the bottom is just taking a picture and being able to have a 3D picture on it. So the ability to use augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality started in the automotive world, has expanded into pretty much everything that we do, including entertainment, and is fundamentally changing how we interact, how we do assessments, and very, very importantly, how we consume analytics to be able to make decisions. Because far better looking at the chart on the top, the picture on the top right, than looking at that in an Excel spreadsheet and trying to make the call. So that's really one of the fundamentals of where AR, VR, and MR are kind of taking us. The other thing is 3D and 4D printing. People don't realize how new this is. It was invented in 1986, not that far back. Started with just a thought on what we would do, and we have progressed it so much that we are now able to do 3D and 4D printing for very many practical uses. The shuttle bus you see at the bottom right, it's from a local company here called Local Motors out of Arizona in the United States. This is an autonomous vehicle. It seats 12 people, no driver. It's used primarily for campuses. The really beautiful thing about this is this vehicle, apart from the engine block, the drivetrain, and the tires, is completely 3D printed. It's 3D printed. You can build a whole vehicle in 3 days. It gets 3D printed. And the even more profound impact for this, the factory that's used to build this can be drop shipped to any location, set up in a month, and then you can start 3D printing these buses. Imagine what that does for logistics. You don't have to build a bus in Bangalore and then ship it all the way to Dubai. You can actually drop ship a factory to Dubai, print 10,000 of these, fold up the factory, and move on. It completely changes warehousing, transportation, ports, airports, services such as this. So 3D and 4D printing is substantially, again, going to change the landscape of supply chain and what that means. And many companies are now thinking through what would this mean for themselves, including infrastructure firms like ports and airports are significantly looking at this. Ports are going to see potentially declining transport. Airports are going to see more transport because now you can ship smaller things faster versus having to ship them on containers in ships. So 3D, 4D printing, and AR, VR, two of the 12 technologies that we saw, fundamentally going to shift a lot of the things that we do today. So this, I wanted to just kind of put this up. This is from the oil and gas industry. This is a study that was done by Deloitte that looked at all of the various technologies, engineering, supply chain type issues that's happening out in the world, and then tried to map how does this impact one industry. Now, this is for the O&G industry, so not directly applicable to ANC. But what I wanted to kind of convey with this slide was they're all interconnected. None of these technologies is happening in a vacuum. They're not happening because of something that it would only do. It impacts everything. So as the AEC industry, as you guys are going to get out into that space, you need to be aware of everything that's going on because it is going to impact what you do on a daily basis, the decisions you get to make, and how you plan, how you build, how you operate the AEC that we are going to do on. So I just want to kind of convey that with the technology deluge picture. The other thing to kind of remember is the pace of change itself is drastically increasing. If you look at how we have evolved as a society, there was 8,000 years between the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. So pretty much, tens of thousands of generations had the same life between those 2 years. Industrial revolution was a big, big shift. But between that and the invention of the light bulb, there was 120 years. Between the light bulb and the moon landing was 90 years. Now, there's something very interesting about the moon landing. The first flight was in the 1900s. The moon landing was in 1960s, late 1960s. Between that, we went from first taking off with a powered flight to putting a man on the moon in about 70 odd years. It's amazing how fast that happened. The internet, the gap between the moon landing and the internet was 22 years. The genome sequence happened in 9 years. Since the genome sequence happens, many of the stuff that you saw on the earlier chart happened post that. In the last 15 or 20 years, the number of things we have invented, how fast they're advancing, and how they're interacting with each other has significantly increased. So every generation now lives pretty much a different life than the previous generation. We live a different life than you will. Your kids will live a different life than you do. So that's what is important. And the other thing that's interesting to know is how quickly, as society, we adopt new things has significantly changed. If you look at some of these new technologies that happened since the 1900s, it took a significant portion of time to go. So the steeper the line, the quicker the adoption. If you see how quickly the cell phone got adopted, how quickly the internet got adopted, how quickly Facebook got adopted. It took 3 years to reach 50 million people. We are getting more and more geared towards being able to we are getting more and more geared to being able to adopt them faster. So you'll notice on many of my slides there are links at the bottom. You can find the names of it. So any one of these topics that interests you more, you can kind of dig into that as you see fit. And there's a lot of data in every single one of these that you can kind of take forward. So the pace of change is increasing. The adoption curve is getting steeper. There's a lot of technology happening that's fundamentally changing everything. So we are really moving into a different business model. So this first one is something I really love to talk about. So the one on the left, the one on the right is a Ferrari 488. It costs about 300,000 US dollars to get. When you put in an order, it'll take you about 2 to 3 years to get the car. The one on the left is a Tesla. They released something a few years ago called a ludicrous mode, right? So on a Ferrari 488, you can get from 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds. It'll cost you $300,000 and about a 3-year wait to get one, but you can do it. Tesla came out with a software update that they call ludicrous mode. You could download it. It takes you 20 minutes to download and install it on your computer, on your car. It costs you $10,000. And in about an hour after you download it, you can go from 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds. So we have completely changed fundamentally the business model of what it means to own a fast car, what it is, and how do you do it, and what do you mean, what does an update mean. So this fundamental shift, not saying that a Tesla is a Ferrari 488, but the possibilities of what this shows us is what we should be aware of and be cognizant of. Second thing is, going back to virtual reality, when Oculus, this is the device on the left, came out, it was a phenomenal advancement. It was only a $250 US device, but you could really get into immersive technology. Google a year later came out with what you see on the right. It's called the Google Box. You can download it for free, the app on an Android device on the web. Just go to the Google Play Store, download the app. You can go to google.com, order this set of, it's a cardboard box. They send you the kit for free, or I think it has some nominal cost. You assemble it, you can create apps within it. It took me an hour to create an app to use the Google Box. Even at that low end of the spectrum, $250 for a virtual reality device, immersive technology, to getting it for nearly free is happening. So complete business models are changing around what the technology. This is part of the reason why our adoption curve is getting better and better and faster. So all of this was kind of background with the first pillar, the technology. Let's talk about the second one, demographics, who we are, right? The first one was the things that we are inventing, the things that we are doing, the things that we are building. This is who we are. This is a population of where we live in the world. The height of the spike shows the intensity of how many people live per square 2 kilometers actually. This is where we live today. This is our footprint around the globe. But within that, what are we, right? So if this is a chart from 2015, this kind of projected that we would end up with a peak population in the world of $11.2 billion. 11.2 billion people. But this chart is outdated because the red line kind of came up into picture. The red line really is our, population growth rate in the world. It is declining everywhere. It's declining everywhere because family planning policies, our knowledge of what we need, the complete lowering of infant mortality, all affected us as a society. So everybody's having lesser kids. More kids are surviving, so everybody's having lesser kids. So our population is not going to hit $11.2 billion. And this is because of something called the replacement fertility rate. So the theory is you need 2.1 kids per couple to replace society as we know it today on a regular basis. Most countries are well below 2.1 now. Some are in serious decline, like Germany and Japan. Serious decline. India itself is at a 2.2 average. There's only 6, but it's a very good number. And that's 2.2 average is also, there's only 6 states in India that are well above the 2.2. Most states are well below the 2.2. So India is also getting to that level where it can only replace what they have. It cannot increase. So what does this, so the population's stagnating, declining in some cases. We are just replacing what we have. But within that structure, who we are is also different. The yellow, red, blue picture on the very left is the traditional model of how any society works. The red is the 0 to 14s, The reproductive age technically defined for these charts as 15 to 44 is the yellow, and blue is defined as post-reproductive. So can't have kids after that for the most part. Society traditionally has been a lot of kids, a good chunk of contributing population, and then declining towards the top. As the fertility rate declines, as populations get older, as our healthy living standards improve, we are moving from the left all the way to the right. So you can see what the model looks like in declining populations. Many declining population societies are now struggling with not having enough productive people to support the people in the blue. Not saying that the people in the blue are not productive, but this is an economics point of view. So this, on top of where we live, this is our changing demographics. But what does this really mean? It means the needs of society are fundamentally different. We need more hospitals. We need less childcare. We need more care for the elderly. We need more systems that are automated because there are fewer people in the productive cycle to kind of manage the operations we need to run the world. All of this means, from an architecture, engineering, construction industry perspective, we have to rethink what we build, how long we use it for, what can we change it. So this is the who we are within it. This is another chart. This is a US chart, but this is what we do. This is a 150 viewpoint on the industries that people worked in. You can see in the 1850s, it was mostly agriculture. It's very little now. We are producing more at a higher quality with far fewer people because all of the technologies are helping with it. Mining has declined. Household work has declined. Trade has increased. Financial services didn't exist then. It's now a big thing. Healthcare has become a big thing. Telecommunications did not exist. Now it's an industry. So this is what we do, right? So the industries that build things, the industries that create and manage society is changing. And there's a very similar chart, I'm sure, for India that somebody's done the assessment on. But where we live, who we are, and what we do is fundamentally shifting. So that's the demographics angle to what you need to think about. And the final thing is urbanization itself. Remember at the very beginning, I said most of us are now living in an urban environment. The urban environment is tough to define, right? So where we live there is no such thing as this is the city and then suddenly you're going into rural. What we live is the continuum, what you see in the middle. You have a large city with an urban core, you have secondary cities around it, you have towns, villages that are somewhere connected. Across all of this, you need all of the infrastructure that you need to kind of sustain society as a whole. So the pipes that carry water don't stop because the city stops. It has to go into everywhere. Electricity has to go into everywhere. Telecommunications has to go everywhere. So the fundamental infrastructure goes into this urban spatial structure. And what we build needs to sustain over that period in time. Like I live in metropolitan Washington, D.C. We still have water pipes that are made of wood from 150 years ago. And I'm sure that's true in many of the urbanized cities that were built that far back. We're living with 10 generations of technology in things we do every day that you don't realize it's held together with glue and duct tape. But that's really the infrastructure of where we live and what we do. And what all of this is also evolving is what we're calling emerging mega regions. So these are the ones in the United States, the mega regions where they're all connected, and some of them cross countries. So the one that says Great Lakes is the largest economic mega region in the world. It's 70% in the US, 30% in Canada. It's around Detroit, Chicago, that area of the world. Significant chunk of change with regard to what it develops and what it builds. And then I just wanted to show you where I come from. So this is the picture of Greater Washington. So I live where the little red flag is, in a suburban area connected with the urban core. This is split between two states, and DC is a federal district. So 3 different governments, 2 states, urban, suburban, all interconnected. We have 3 electric utilities, 15 water utilities, 1,000 developers, all have to interconnect to make what we live work together. And as civil engineers, architects, people are going to go into the construction industry, people are going into the operate industry. This is the reality of where we are and what we do. And so all the trends that we talked about has to work in this space. So let's look at it from an India perspective as well, right? The chart on the left is what's considered more than 50% built up is yellow, and what's less than that is green. So this was surprising to me when I pulled this up. It's mostly green. We are mostly still a rural country with pockets of yellow and 2 or 3 big pockets of red, but it's mostly green. And Kerala, very interestingly, is yellow throughout. Very little kind of rural, what's considered rural. It is urban, a good chunk of it. And then the chart in the middle is population density per square kilometer. You can see where the darker shades are is really where a lot of the people are. So the needs of what you would need on the Kerala coast is very different than what you would need as you go up north. Very different. And then the chart on the right is something called the Desakota model, which is trying to figure out each urban zone, what it really means and how it goes. It's really interesting to me that Kerala and Chennai are more similar to Southeast Asia, and Delhi, Bombay, and Calcutta are more similar to the cities in China with what the model is and what is being built, how it's being built, and where it goes. Again, like I said, all of this is available out on the web. I've got some links at the bottom. You can search for it, from which papers they've come from. You can read up in any one of these topics that you know. So we've talked about technology changing. We've talked about where we live, and we've talked about who we are. How does it all come together, right? So at the end of the day, everything that we built is for the good of society. Civilization started because we found out that by giving different roles to different parts of the population, we could do more than everybody being a hunter-gatherer individually for each family. So what that means is it comes together for us in people, place, and our changing needs. So there's a whole bunch of things that we classify as human capital, what we do as a people, the things that we build, the things that we operate, the things that we sustain, what we need to build to make that happen, which is the physical capital, and then, of course, the social capital. Why are we doing this in the first place? To continue society. And now with this whole thread around smart and sustainable and resilient, we are getting more aware of the fact that we can't just use and then discard. We need to be very smart about making it sustainable. At the same time, because of things like climate change and other things, we have to be resilient. We have to be at a place where if piece parts of our society break, other parts have to be able to recover for it, both because of natural disasters, man-made disasters, a whole host of other things. So this is how it all comes together. Now, I want to deep dive a little bit more into the physical capital space and really what this means from a smart cities perspective. So this is one of the charts that was created about, it's dated about 10 years ago now, on what does it mean to be the resident of a smart region, right? So there's everything that we talked about that's physical infrastructure. And the silos that you see, the transportation and logistics, water and natural environment, etc., are industries that have been in existence for 3,000 years. While they were building the pyramids, they were still thinking about how to get to work, what roads need to be there. Water from everything from Rome all the way to Mohenjo-daro, there were waterway systems, sewer systems, trying to figure out in some cases, trying to figure out what it is. So these are not new industries. But within each industry, take transportation and logistics as an example, all of the 12 things you saw in the technology plus another 12 underneath and another 12 underneath it are applicable. It's changing transportation the last 20 years significantly so. All of the stuff on why we need transportation, what kind of cars, going from horse buggies to gas guzzlers to electric vehicles and hydrogen cars now. It's changing transportation. Logistics, we talked about supply chain. What do we need to transport where? Can be 3D print stuff there? What is advanced light manufacturing? So in each one of these silos, there's significant change happening. And then there's change happening that also run into things that are why we build them, which is the human infrastructure. And then how do you plan for it? Everything from economic development to public policy to sustainability, all of the governance that needs to go into it. But all of these things also are then supported by pure industry needs. There's nothing that changes a urban region than somebody coming in with a massive new stadium, somebody building a new airport, somebody coming in to put a manufacturing plant into it. If there's gold discovered somewhere or rare materials for electronics and you have to mine, significant impact happens in every region because of what the industry does. So these 4 things, in each bucket, there's lots of things happening. And there's lots of things that a region needs to think about on what are we good at? How do we intersect them? What do we do? How do we then impact what we build? How do we then make them sustainable? How do we make our region resilient? All of this is underlined with architecture and civil engineering, because that is what builds the concrete and steel that makes most of the rest of it possible. So that's why it is so important to know all of the rest of it. So as you're going into the fields that you go in, you can figure out where would you have the best impact, that you have the most interest in. But the other really interesting thing about this is, till we had data, we kind of knew what's on this slide, but we couldn't quantify it. Everything is interconnected. Water is one of those sustaining things that have to exist for society to succeed. But water traditionally tends to be an underfunded industry, because most of you don't even know how much you pay for water a month. It's very low compared to how much you pay for electricity. But it's a very tough industry to be in. But if you take away the fact that it's just water and go up one level, it affects everything else that you do. So that's really where a lot of what we are trying to say comes into effect. Everything is connected, and you have to know where the pieces are so you can do big, massive kind of changes as the needs may be. So when we talk about infrastructure, critical infrastructure, it runs this gamut, right? Let's stick with water, right? So just in water itself in the United States, we have 153,000 water systems and 16,000 wastewater systems, just in one country. I don't know what the number is for India, but this is significant, right? This is huge, and every single one of these boxes has this. But this is critical infrastructure, which is core of civil engineering, water systems, transportation systems. And if you take water system and kind of break it up, right, what you see on the left is conventional things we built, right? Everything from how do you collect it, the dams that you need, how do you generate electricity with, what goes to farm, how do you make stuff portable, once it's used, where does it go? And stuff that you start seeing towards the right is, as technology has started to come in, what does it really mean? And the things you see on the right are the types of jobs, the players. You can be a planner, a designer, a builder, an operator, a maintainer, just within the water environment. There's lots of innovations happening that's completely changing a lot of what we think and do, even just in water. And lots of opportunities from developing products to deploying products in the space. So this is one out of all of the things that we saw in critical infrastructure that's fundamentally there, right? And every single one of this could be a career choice for somebody. So everything changes, everything is this. And so for us to put it all together, to kind of look at it, when you're building something, this is your continuum, right? You plan for something, let's say it's a dam, you design it, you build it, you deploy it, you commission it, you operate it for whatever the life cycle of it is. You're constantly monitoring it, you're constantly optimizing it. At some point, it gets to end of life. You have to decommission it, build something else. You plan again and start again. So this loop is infinite, especially in the cities we live in. This loop is infinite. So if you look at everything on the left as planning and everything on the right as operate, A and B, you have to deal with each of them differently. Smart cities primarily started in the B because it's far easier to monitor and optimize than to think about how to plan and deploy and what you build. So as an example, we have always been doing optimizing operations, right? 5,000 years ago, we had physical maps. 1995, MapQuest and things came down. You'd print a map. I don't know if any of you remember, your parents probably do. You print a map to go from A to B. 2000 onwards, you basically had apps you could get from a map. 2005 onwards, they become real-time, phone-based, ubiquitous. And now they're getting predictive and multimodal. In many cities now, you can get up in the morning. If you go to, I don't know, Singapore, get up in the morning, you say you want to go from A to downtown, it gives you 5 options, some of these apps. Car, taxi, road, bus. It gives you time, it gives you cost. You can decide, little dongle, to figure out what is the best way to do it. And it's predictive. It knows historical, it knows whether it's raining today, it knows whether there's an accident, and you can say, today, this is your best answer, either by cost or by time. So this is where we're going. The problem we had is the same thing we've had for 5,000 years. How do I get optimally from point A to point B? How we are solving for it has become changed. So this is in the B section, the optimizing operations section. Look at the A side of it, right? There are lots and lots of examples of where we are completely relooking at what a city should look like. Suzhou Industrial Park is in China. This is one of the projects I was peripherally involved with. It's one of the largest kind of urban remakings that has happened in the world. It's amazing the amount of thought that went into what goes into where and how would you do it. The thing in the middle is by it's called Regent Cities. It's by SOM. It's a large architecture planning firm in the world. They're based out of New York City. This is a project that they did in LA, Los Angeles, about reimagining the use of the city and of the buildings within it. And this is a project that I was personally involved in, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, the 50-year master plan. This is really looking at what should the port look like, because the traditional approach in port has been, we are going to get more containers every year, ships are going to get bigger. Those have been the two metrics for the last 50 years. So let's dig more, let's create more, let's assess more. That paradigm is shifting. So a lot of the thought that went into the last 50-year master plan, which got published last year, I believe in June, again downloadable on the web, is looking at other options and being flexible enough to change those options and not to do this plan every 10 years, but to have annual reviews of what needs to change because of how fast technology is changing. So planning and designing, SMART is finally coming to planning and designing, rethinking why we build what we build. One of the big debates in the United States has been about parking structures. We have a lot of them because we love the cars that we have here. But people are using less and less cars. People are getting to more and more shared rides. So therefore, when you build a new structure, do you need a parking structure like traditionally we would have built a parking structure? Can we build it where it is reclaimable so that in 20 years' time or 10 years' time, you can convert half of it into a building of some other type? How would you design and build that? Where you can convert buildings and use cases to be something else, not for the entire lifespan, but a third. And what should that look like? So SMART is coming to both ends of it, from planning and it's coming to operations, right? And within the AEC industry itself, we are, technology savvy. This is just, in one kind of technology adoption with regard to what we do. I don't know if any of you know what a slide rule is, but that's where we started to now having digital twins and 3D printing. And this is true across many things that we do, not just on the computer side of it, right? These are some of the other innovations that's happening in AEC. Massive building information modeling systems, new ways to deploy thermal bridging that completely changes what we do. Offsite construction, especially with the advent of COVID-19. What does that mean? It's not just offsite fabrication, offsite construction itself. There's a big push in the United States and Canada now on mass timber construction, figuring out how we can build taller and faster. And lots of advanced materials. And advanced materials primarily comes from the quantum world. Graphene is one of those things that's come from the quantum world. And what does that really mean? How can we change? Do we have to use the way concrete and steel has been the way it has? So a lot of innovations are happening in AEC that you need to be aware of depending on the level of interest in what you do. So the new reality. So from a strategic perspective, right? The value chains that we see that have traditionally influenced AEC, where your work comes from, what kind of things are being built, how long do they have to last for, how flexible do we have to be, where do we make sustainability come into the picture, both from how unsustainable making cement is, all the way down to how long something has to last, how changing needs and demographics, what kind of buildings do we need, where do they need to go, how do they need to intersect, what transportation needs are required. Strategically, these things are changing, right? New technology innovations, new engineering innovations. We haven't talked about automation or autonomous. Both of this are significantly changing the use case and needs of many things. Going back to the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey example, today we have enough robots that we can do many things that you would need on a port completely automated. So one of the debates that came up is, do we need to build certain things at human scale anymore? So if a portion of the port that's just got to do with unloading never needs humans there, do you need to provide heat? Do you need light? You don't. Do you need human scale? You don't. You can have robots that's 1/3 the scale. And then therefore, what does that mean from a construction perspective? What does that mean from an operate perspective? So it's really rethinking the use case of what something is because technology has advanced so much. So new engineering innovations, new technology innovations. Another engineering innovation that I was peripherally involved with was in the mining industry, designing an entire train track that can pick up mined materials without stopping the cart and drop it off without stopping the cart. So the trains essentially run on a complete loop from the mine all the way to the port, which is about 3,000 kilometers away. The train pauses, gets loaded, goes, drops off, unloaded, and drives back. Small optimization, but significantly changes the value chain and the cost across that model. So evolving business models, new players, lots of cross-industry cooperation that's happening. So lots of things happening in strategic in AEC that you need to be aware of and be cognizant of and participate in promoting. And then in the post-pandemic world, I mean, this is still an argument whether we'll ever be in a post-pandemic world, primarily because things like Corona and others are going to be more and more prevalent. What does that really mean for us from work safety perspective, from job tracking, from social distancing? Again, offsite construction is a big topic of conversation here in North America. Is what does that really mean? Could we construct more and more offsite and then transport it to site? And would that make the place safer? Not just from safety because of coronavirus or other diseases, but just safety on the job site itself perspective. So lots of new realities from a tactical perspective and lots of new realities just from a strategic perspective. So some thoughts to take away for all of you is demographic shifts are changing our needs and wants rapidly as a society. The more we know about them, the more we understand what we need to do, so we are not wasting talent, time, and resources. We need to be resilient, we need to be sustainable, we need to be creative in how we use what. Technology and engineering innovation is happening at breakneck speeds around the world. If you're interested in that, there's lots and lots of opportunities and people looking for skill and talent to go and help build the next robot that can change something, build the next business model that can become the next Uber in construction. There's lots of opportunity there, lots of capability and ability available. Resilience and sustainability, care for the earth is now become a fundamental human value across every society. What do we need to do? And it's tough to care about the earth when parts of population are scrambling for food. This is the last thing on your mind, right? So as a society, are we now starting to need to rethink that? Do we now need to do things like universal basic care and things like that you would have heard of, is make that segment of society that is worrying about food on the table every day better off because we have the ability to, so that we can now figure out how do we as a society get more resilient and get more sustainable. And you, all of you on the call today, you are the next generation. You hold the key, you hold the drive, you hold what we need to do. So thank you so much for the time and listening today. Let's open it up for questions or anything else at this point in time.
Thank you, sir, for such an informative session. Now, the platform is open for students' doubts and queries. Please feel free to unmute yourself and speak up.
And please feel free to put stuff in chat as well if you're at a place where you can't speak up.
Any queries?
Hello, Naren sir. Sir.
Yeah, definitely.
Naren sir, are you there?
I am there.
Sir, you
As I
can
was
start so
listening
that
to-
students will be coming.
As I was listening to the talk, I think a lot of thoughts raced through my mind, actually. First of all, it's great thing that great motivation for the students, an alumni of CET, working in Washington and dealing with high concepts and things like that. It's a great motivation. But when students do BTech, when they're doing BTech, they are dealing with the nuts and bolts of the civil engineering, like, the basic courses and things like that. Where does the shift occur for them to be sitting in a high place, like maybe getting a job in US or things like that? Can you shed some light from your personal experiences? I think that will be greatly appreciated by the students.
That's a fantastic question, and everybody's. First of all, thank you so much, Naren sir. That's very kind words. Yeah, I mean, everybody's career paths are different. So when I completed my BTech in civil engineering from engineering college, I went to work for a couple of years. I went to this company, UK-based company called Mott MacDonald. I got posted to their Dubai office, but a lot of my projects were done in Kuwait and Turkey. And it was your standard kind of first job you get out of school. I was doing a lot of drafting. I was doing a lot of, in those days, Lotus 123, but Excel spreadsheets on costing. I was doing a little bit of designing, although that was really my area of interest, was to be a designer. I was doing very little structural design because I was at the bottom of the totem pole. But I was there, and I had this mentor, who was this senior engineer from Scotland, who was just brilliant at being able to be intuitive in how he did structural design, and that really, really inspired me. So, I worked there for 2 years, and with his advice and help, I decided to pursue a PhD in structural engineering. So that's how I ended up in Georgia Tech in the United States. Standard process: you apply, you get a visa, you go through the process, and you land up on foreign shores trying to figure out what the heck you're doing there. So I landed up in Atlanta, and was in my program. Halfway through it, I kind of started discovering other things. Mostly, my bent was mostly business and technology, I think. So halfway through the program of trying to be a doctorate in structural engineering, I gravitated more and more towards management, and that was kind of my path into trying to find new things to do within the space. And I landed up at the IBM PricewaterhouseCoopers after a couple of steps that allowed me to then explore those things. I ended up becoming a true consultant. And that really kind of opened for me the doors on what and how to go. And much of life, if you think back on it, happens while you make plans. I think there's a famous saying that says that. And my life is certainly true of that regard. If I had followed through what I wanted to do when I was 16, I would have been a structural engineer in a design office somewhere. But as you learn more about the world, and as you discover more things and more opportunities come your way, you take some, you don't take some. And I took the ones that led me away from core structural engineering. So for about 20 years, I was doing many of the things that you saw on the slide, in looking at it from a technology perspective, setting up new business models. I set up the smart cities business in China for IBM. I led global government strategy for IBM around trying to figure out 10, 15 years out what we need. But all of this exposed me to significant amounts of new innovations, technology. How does innovations make it into our society? Somebody coming up with an idea happens 1,000 times a day. Maybe like a few percentage of those ideas actually get done with anything anybody does anything with. And a very, very, very few number of those actually land as being real. So that process fascinated me a little bit. And that's what kind of led me to a lot of the work that we do today, including what you kind of mentioned, connected DMV at the very top. So because we live in a geography up here that is split between 2 states and the federal government, making anything happen, especially that requires a lot of people to agree, takes a really long time. And so connected DMV standing for DC, Maryland, and Virginia, was established 2 years ago to kind of sit between the 3 governments and be the voice for the people to drive big things. And so we have we have 13 big initiatives that we are doing. But all of this kind of came because of my experience and background starting at CET on, the big thing that I took away from education at CET, and this is going to be true of whatever fields any of your students end up in, is the ability to think critically, quantitatively, and be able to make decisions based on that and help that drive what you do. Thinking like an engineer, I think, is one of the fundamental things to build anything in the world. And I think people, most of you on the call won't realize that till you all are much older. But that's really what I would say you take away from what you have learned is some of you will do exactly what you have learned. Many of you will not. I think the numbers are very clear. But even the ones that don't, never forget the lessons that you have learned in knowing how to solve the problems that you're solving. You'll just apply it to many different fields.
I think one of the major things which happens to students in the state, maybe many places, is that they think of getting a job in PSC, Kerala State public sector jobs or government jobs and things like that, and they want to go to these jobs from their homes. That is one issue. Another issue is what are the things they don't do at college, which may help them in future. I think this is two. I'm asking two questions actually, basically. One is what they don't do in college, whether it affects their future. Second one is whether thinking of PSC, thinking of jobs in Kerala itself will affect their future. What way they can change the mindset rather.
So for the first one, it's a very fascinating question. So the best education you can have in your life is to travel. This is just fundamentally true. So I didn't grow up in Kerala. I grew up in the Middle East, and I came to Kerala when I was a young man. One of the first things I did was, and this is my parents still to this day do not know, is I just took trains and traveled around India back then, right? I mean, and I was 17, 18 years old, and nobody was really asking about me. I just traveled, and I always had this travel bug. So and you don't have to, this does not affect whether you take a job with PSC or not, but any chance you get, explore the world and travel it. Talk to people, and that expands your mind. And some of you may decide at the end of that, through that what you want with PSC is the best thing. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. And that's a brilliant life. Many of my friends from my batch are working in PSC in jobs that are just perfect, right? Some others, like myself included, always have had the travel bug. So, I've lived in 13 cities in my life, and I've loved the life that I've had, but it's not for everyone. There was a time, I think in 2001 and 2002, I actually didn't go home for 18 months. Like I was working in a consulting job, and every weekend they would give you a ticket to go back home, but they didn't specify where you had to travel. So every weekend I would fly to a different city. And because I lived in hotels at that time, I would have hotel points. So with zero cost to myself, I visited all 50 states in 2001, 2002. It's just, so it's just dependent on what you have. The only kind of fundamental thing I would say is travel, talk to people, experience life, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. The more experiences you have, the better your decisions will be. And Narendra, I lost your second question in the midst of that, and I apologize.
Just about what you do at college, what you don't do at college, whether it impacts your life. Because, sir, I think it is quite natural. Some students are just focused on studies and go ahead. Some students take co-curricular activities seriously, get a lot of experiences. So there's a lot of variation between students, what they do, what they don't do, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we need our fair share of scientists. We need our fair share of Nobel laureates. We need our fair share of businessmen. We need our fair share of sellers. I mean, just everybody has an aptitude for something that you need to kind of follow on. And that aptitude is not one thing, right? This is the other thing that I've learned. In my time out, I've had 3 completely separate, distinct careers. The first one had to do with what I learned in school. The other 2 did not. But the only other thing I would highly recommend is keep an open mind to learning. If you're a lifelong learner, if you're not afraid of change coming down, everything that comes to you that is a challenge, look on it as a learning opportunity. You most likely, have less stress and do better for yourself. Anything technology related, including stuff in civil engineering, right? The standard kind of thing that we have in talent is your talent has anything you have learned has a half-life of 5 years. So, that's about how much it's worth. So you can't have a BTech degree and expect that really to carry you for the rest of your life unless you stay in a very narrow silo, which it's becoming increasingly difficult as we go along. So every 5 years, be prepared to learn something new, be prepared to step out of your wings. From my personal life, I'll give one other example is when I joined Mott MacDonald, computers were just getting to be computers, right? So one of the things that I was asked in my, I think 9 months into my job was to take over and build an AutoCAD division within the Mott MacDonald office in my local regional office. Because I was the youngest, because I was the only one, all the people around looked and said, he knows computers. Let him go do it, right? And at that point, I could have chosen to completely get petrified, but I just jumped into it because at that point it was a job that was given. I knew nothing about AutoCAD or computers. I went and got an online, not an online course, a book course to kind of like do at it from my local college, muddle my way through the first 9 months. But that really was like, good. So don't be afraid to take on challenges even if you don't know them. Work your way through them. Ask for help. I'm not saying go try to do this on your own. Ask for help. Go figure out what it is. But be open to lifelong learning is just the other lesson I would say.
Thank you. I think maybe students are ready with their questions. I do have more questions, but let the students ask them.
Deepu, actually, sir is worked in TKM. He left out TKM. He was in Australia and came back and now settled in Trivandrum. So the way you travel, like that, sir also traveled and he's back as a professor in our department. And really, the way he traveled also is similar to yours.
Oh, that's
Hope
fantastic.
the
Yeah, I mean,
students will be
I
asking
also
questions.
hope someday to come back to Trivandrum after I'm done with my travel bug.
No, go through your travel book as much as possible because you love traveling, right?
I do love traveling.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah. We too love travel because as ladies, as you know, we are stuck with so many situations, so it's not so much easy for us. But still, I too love traveling. Anyway, let the students ask the remaining queries. Please, the students, please do come up. I think Roji and Vino is there, Deepu. Both are there attending. I saw them in the list.
Hey, Rosie. Hey, Vino. Any questions from you guys or anything you want to add to the discussion? Actually, you guys have had very, very stellar careers yourself with everything that you guys have been through.
Hi, Deepu. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I posted a chat question. It's a little long-winded. If you can read it.
Yeah, so the question essentially is, what is the direction litigation or lawsuits take when it comes to data? This is a very interesting question. So there's in the data space, there's people who do nothing but collect data, and then you can access it for a fee. The first line that they have in every one of those systems is, we are not responsible for what you use this data for, primarily because of this one reason, right? They can vet it, they can validate it. So as an example, for this company I was working out of Canada, we had to go find data for underground pipes outside of Toronto. There's a company that does nothing but that. They collect underground pipe data, every type of underground structure data in Toronto, and you can access the database for a fee. The first line is, we are not responsible for what it is. So what we did in the design thing is, we took the data, made our models, figure out what we want to do. Then we hired our own independent verifier to go with LiDAR and other things to test that it was actually where it was. Because at the end of the day, when you're making life and death decisions that have significant impact on society and a cost impact, 2 or 3 times checking is needed, right? So there is that. So there is stuff that you need that level of rigor for. Versus there is stuff that the light end of it, when you're trying to figure out, like as I was before this call, on what is the, how have jobs changed in India? I could find no data on it that I could find, right? But I'm sure there's lots of studies done on it. But the impact of me using that data for something like this is minimal, even if I get it slightly wrong. So it just depends on how valuable what you're doing it is, how much impact it would have, and how much responsibility you take for what you're doing with the data. So it comes in those flavors. And then there's different types of data, right? So if you're dealing with what we call PII, personal information data, there's a whole another level of security that's required, right? Because you don't want somebody's date of birth, personal life, how much they make getting out into the public domain, because then bad actors can use them for different purposes. So so health data, data related to PII is treated differently here. And then there's another kind of data that is national security data. So I live in Washington, D.C. We do a lot of work here as Connected DMV to try to do a lot of integrations, one of which was the 5G rollout for the region. But there is massive pockets in DC that we cannot see the data in, under the CIA, near the White House, near the Pentagon. All national security completely classified. There's no data available to anybody. So when you have to do design within those spaces, there are specialized companies who have been approved for doing stuff within that. So all of those variations come into that. Really, it's a brilliant question, but it takes a lot. And it's not just the lawyers and the judicial systems, it's the policy makers as well, right? What kind of policies do you need to place to give what access? And then how do you not slow down progress? That's the other part of it, right? You don't want the policies to be so restricted that it slows down progress, but at the same time, you want it to be protected. It's a very, very delicate line you have to walk on to make that happen, in my experience.
Thank you.
Very nice to see you again,
Same here, Deepu. I'm planning to see you again in Washington when I come. I'll be there in August.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent.
So I think I will move on to the students. Aishwarya.
Any more queries from students?
Looks like it's a quiet bunch. Come on, guys.
Anyone, please start ask, because he's spent almost an hour with us from US. He put so much effort. As my friend, I just invited him ahead of all the schedules he taken up, all the pain to share the new trends to you. So it's your time to ask the question. So just open up, no issues. Okay, just start on.
Sir, you just mentioned about artificial intelligence. So is it likely that it can automate almost all the jobs, including all the office jobs all over the world within some kind of 20 or 30 years? Is it likely that all the jobs come under this artificial intelligence? Is it likely? Does it happen?
That's a very good question. So let me kind of pose something back at you, right? So when you're making a decision, tomorrow, let's say you decide to go to, I don't know, Bhubaneswar. Let me just make an assumption that you've never been to Bhubaneswar, right? You're making an assumption you want to go tomorrow to Bhubaneswar. There's a set of decisions you make to go do that, right? You need to go, let's say you go by train, you need to go by train, you need to figure out the cities. When you get to the city, you need to find your way around it. How you make those decisions is based on what I would call your corpus of data that you have in your head, right? You know how generally a city works. You know how a train works. You know what a building is like. You know how to buy a ticket. You know what you need to take to sustain yourself for, let's say you're going for a week. You know what to do to call for help, right? All of that is corpus of data. So the level of complexity to make those decisions has come from your experience as, over your life, let's say, 20 years of your life. That experience has built your corpus of data for you to make that decision. Now, let's say you want to program a computer to do this, which is what artificial intelligence is. You have to have corpuses of data that can do that. So most artificial intelligence machines today are very limited in the corpus of data that it tackles. I can have a customer service representative for a mobile telephone company be artificial intelligence. I can teach it everything there is to know about the mobile industry to answer questions about the particular programs, about cost, about bandwidth, about types of phones. That's a corpus of data. That's what it can do. It can do it very well to an extent. It still cannot, you can throw it curveballs, but you can train it, right? So the compute power we have has been to look at corpuses of data in specific fields because you can control what that field is. So while I was with IBM, IBM has an artificial intelligence system called Watson. And Watson's initial kind of focus was to look at healthcare and life sciences data. Within that, it was very difficult, even just within that breadth. And the primary within life sciences was to look at oncology, cancer, and certain types of cancer, right? So just within that, in that field of oncology, there's 3,000 articles written every day. There's 1,000 different new points of entry into what something means. Even it's impossible for a human to figure out what that is. So the focus was to get a computer to understand as much of that as possible. And then what artificial intelligence does is it does not come you and give you, this is the answer. It gives you a probability scale of what the answer could be. And then somebody has to make a decision. So that's a state of the art with regard to where it is, right? So to have it do certain types of jobs that's definable, where you can have a corpus of data, yes, it's very possible. Things like accounting, creating the initial package for a law report, doing basic engineering, running a train. Yes, it's granular, it's detailed, it's searching for oil. possible to do, right? Being able to take a train to go from A to B, probably we are probably a generation away from that. Hope that answered your question.
Yes, sir. Any more queries?
So silent crowd, please come up with the question, please. The senior students are there, no MTech ones, please. And BTech also final years are there. I've seen so many names. Come on, you can ask the questions.
As long as it's not a detailed civil engineering question, I'll make an attempt.
Any more queries?
I think no one has doubts, right? All are very well understood. Oh.
One or the other, just to kind of expand on what Mr. Narayanan asked earlier, one of the other things is opportunities in life don't come along as often as you would think. So when stuff comes along, grab it with both hands and just kind of take advantage of it. You're never going to be 100% prepared for anything. Never. You can be our age, we know myself, Ronnie, and still not be prepared for everything that comes your way. But just be ready to kind of not say no and take on the challenge. And it's okay to be afraid, but don't not take the leap because you're afraid. I remember what I was like when I was in my late teens, early 20s. It's a difficult place to be because you're still trying to figure out what you want, who you are, and everything you see around you is restrictions. Everybody around you is an adult, and therefore they must know what they're doing. But how you were when you were 3 years old is most likely how you're going to be when you're 50. So your basic kind of character, if there are things that you think you can work on to take advantage of opportunities, please do. That's the only other thing I would leave you all with. It's a fantastic world you guys are coming into when you come to the end of your degrees and come out into the real world. The world really will be your oyster when you come. There's so many types of opportunities, so many ways you can make a difference, so many things you have to be created and discovered. Don't let where you are, who you are, where you live, your degree, anything stop you from pushing the boundary.
I think one more thing which I wanted to highlight is, see, you have talked about so many areas like augmented reality, 3D printing, so many areas are there. But what should the students do? Say, obviously, they cannot specialize or study in detail about any of these things during the undergraduate courses. So what they should do to grab opportunities or create opportunities?
I would challenge that a little bit. I would challenge you to learn these things while you are in college. So you've heard of MOOCs, right? Like the MIT courseware is online, edX is online, Coursera is online. They have certificate programs for anything you can touch and look and think about. Take some. Set yourself a challenge to come out by the time you graduate to have a certificate in 2 things that are new technologies that are coming out. Just so you know what it is. You don't have to do anything with it, but at least you know what it is. Take a programming course. Go figure out how to program in quantum computing. There's multiple courses available for free on Microsoft Azure and IonQ and other websites out there. Same thing for drones, same thing for ARVR, same thing for any number of those 12 things that you said. There's courseware available for free that will get you a certificate at the end of it, but more than that, give you the knowledge to at least know what this is about. Read, learn. I mean, it doesn't have to be just the fact that you're learning because you have to pass an exam. That is important, but learning for the sake of understanding what you might want to do. Because a good portion of what you're there in college for, besides graduating, is knowing what you want to do with your life, right? And how do you know unless you explore? The only way to know is to explore. So I would challenge that in saying explore. And sometimes daily life gets in your way. In the fact that hey, I have an assignment due, I have to do this, I have to do that, and I have to go prepare lunch. Everybody has family, society, social, and pressures based on what your tasks are. But if you let that dictate what you do, especially at the ages you are in, before you have really true responsibilities in many ways, in most cases, I would think, you're missing an opportunity. And this is a very hard thing to know to do when you are 20. I did not. It's a very difficult thing to kind of get into your head. And I wish somebody had kind of knocked a lot more sense into me to take those 5-6 years I had where I was, all my responsibility was by going to class, to actually do more. But argument's sake, Vino, Ronnie, myself, we didn't really have the opportunities that you guys have today to kind of learn about the world. We had the libraries, that was it. It was physical books, and they're also dated physical books, right? Now you have the best of what the world has to offer in a real-time basis. Take advantage of it. You don't have to pay. And reach out, right? Like, so I'm putting myself out, and I'm going to put Vino out there as well. Reach out to any one of us. We are more than happy to kind of guide young minds to do it. Because like I said, the last bullet point on my last slide is you are the key. You guys have to step up to take this to the next level once we are done. So you have to start now.
I think the most difficult thing is to challenge, because already students are used to taught courses. To take the challenge and do something on their own is something I think the students have to learn. I would like to ask one more question. See, considering the population of India, the poverty, the corruption, the resource scarcity, we hear of smart cities coming in. Different cities have been selected for being for getting funding for smart cities. But is it really going to happen? Will it happen, considering the situation in India?
So, yeah, I think on the infrastructure side of it, it'll definitely, so let's say I was involved in 2 projects on the BMIC corridor, 2012 probably. So, I was involved in a couple of the port projects that are happening in India today. I was involved in a water project actually in Kerala. So in infrastructure, yes, absolutely. I think technology's advanced so much that it is not possible for the Indian infrastructure providers not to be part of the continuum. And to kind of do it. It's definitely happening. It's happening in hospitals and medical sciences. And from a pure technology play perspective, it's happening as Indian companies being part of the build ecosystem on, having data companies, having, insight and analytics companies, things of that nature. I think what that is used to solve societal problems is a little bit more of a harder kind of challenge. So it's not like, in the United States, there is not disparity or poverty between the haves and the have-nots. It's less visible because, as you correctly surmised, the population is much lower. We have 350 million people in a land that is 4 times the size of India. Right? You have 1.2 billion in 1/4 the land area, which makes the problems a lot more visible. So that is one of my other points, that urbanization makes everything more visible. And in India, everything is front and center because of it. And, there's also the other thing is you can't have the luxury, you don't have the luxury to sit and think about how to improve society when you're worried about feeding your kids, when you're worried about roof over your head. So, and that's a significant problem, right? I think it's probably less so in Kerala and a couple of other states than it is in much of the rest of India. But that's a huge problem to have. One of the things that I always remember is a statement when the Prime Minister of, I think, Finland came to India and sat with Jawaharlal Nehru, and they were talking about what they're doing for blind people and blind kids in Finland. And Nehru, asked what the population of Finland was and whatever the number was. And he basically said, we have more blind people here. We have, I think, 3 times more blind people here than you have people in your country. So the amount of people really makes the problems harder. And I think the government structure in India also makes it a little bit harder to do. One of the things that I really like about the US is while there's a lot of kind of discontinuity across state lines, each state has a tremendous amount of individualism in what it can do to solve its problems. So a problem to something might happen that is solved in California and then gets exported to the other states. It might be solved in Texas and gets exported to other states. So you have like these 50 centers of thought that can come up with something and then other people can take it, versus it all being driven from one central. So that federated system, I think, helps us. And maybe in India, it's much more centrally controlled, which makes it a little bit harder to make decisions and a little bit harder to kind of buck the system, as it were. So.
Yes, sir. Your words are really inspiring for the young minds. Is there any participants who are having feedback for this session? You can unmute yourself and share the feedback.
Hey, Devu, this is Roji. How are you?
Hey, Roji. Good.
Yeah.
How are you? Good to hear you.
Yeah, I'm good. I left the meeting, like I have a meeting. But I was on the meeting before too, but like this one I supposed to go. So that's why I didn't hear anything like what he told like after 10 o'clock. So it was a good presentation. I know like you mix with both technology and civil engineering, even though I left civil engineering totally. So no, nothing on civil engineering on my side, totally gone.
Yeah, I left civil engineering for a couple of decades, and then when smarter cities came along, especially because some of the projects I got involved in, I was the only person who could do the translation between technology and kind of core infrastructure build out. So it wasn't civil engineering that I had learned from a structural engineering perspective. It was more on the planning, design, economics of civil engineering. So somehow my two worlds have come back together, and my dad finally is like, all that money we spent on educating you in engineering is finally having some value.
Yeah, and I know like you took the masters in structural engineering, and now you're talking about totally the urban design. It's like a totally different change. Yeah, because when you talk about the IoT devices, like okay, that can be more interested into that because sometimes I deal with that also. So yeah.
Yeah, but it's all coming together, Roji. I think that's what's critical for these young minds to kind of realize, right? All our industries are trying to start to come together. Like Google started the smart cities division, right? This is a data company that had website search technology. That's still today, 85% of the revenue of Google comes from ad in website searches, right? And this is a company that's got 50 different other businesses, most of which don't make as much as they should, but they are in the smart city space, as an example, right? So who is trying to get into infrastructure? So they wanted to be a design build company, right? Which is the whole Sidewalk Labs experiment in Toronto was based on trying to have a company that started in web search, try to compete with the SOMs and the HOKs of the world in being a designer company, and then eventually getting into the construction space. And this is happening across the board, right? So if you go to like any of the big conglomerates in Korea or Japan, Hitachi, Samsung, they all have AEC components to what funds the big ones, right? So I think all our worlds are starting to get more and more entwined when you talk about traditional silos of industry and what you do as a job, unless, like I said, you're just going to go to be a geotech engineer or a structural engineer and that's all you do. You are going to get exposed to many, many things. And even in those phases, if you're just a geotech engineer, as an example, quantum computing, quantum sensing, actually, not computing, is coming up with an entirely new type of way we can sensor, so we can measure things, including new things of gravimeters, which can measure at such a fine tune that now it's become a reality to start thinking about being able to predict earthquakes. So it's that level of deep sensoring that is potentially possible with quantum gravimeters, which then means in the geotech space, you have a completely different tool now to be able to do the solved problems that you have. And instead of estimating with formulas and based on tables in a book, you might actually be able to measure what you need to do to make a much more finessed answer to where something needs to go. So that's like a very kind of tiny, minute example of where these worlds are intersecting and crossing that you have to really keep an open mind to try to figure out what you might be able to do more with.
Anyway, I don't have any questions. So open to all the other people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roji. Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
Sir, the session was very useful and enlightening. We have understood how to reshape our urbanization. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us such an informative session. Thank you.
You're absolutely welcome.
So it was an excellent section, and the presentation was awesome and clear and understandable one too. And you have provided very valuable information, and finally, I really enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you. I'm glad you took away something.
Sir, I found the talk to be highly informative, and we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. Thank you so much, sir.
The session was
Thank you
very
all.
informative. So thank you so much for your time and valuable words. Thank you, sir.
Oh, you're welcome, everybody.
Any more feedback? Okay. Now I welcome Benita PJ from MTech to propose the vote of thanks.
Good evening, all. It's a great honor and privilege for me to express word of thanks for today's session. First and foremost, let me thank our special guest and speaker of the day, Mr. George D. Thomas, for a wonderful session. The presentation is an enlightening and an informative one, and I'm sure that the knowledge you shared may definitely be useful for us. Thank you for words. I express my gratitude to our management, head of the department, faculties, and mentors Rani for their encouragement and great support. And also, I express my gratitude towards the organizing team for the great effort in making this event a grand success. On the behalf of entire student chapter of Marine Engineering College, we thank each and everyone who participated in this session. Last but not the least, let me thank the God Almighty for making this webinar a grand success. Once again, thanking you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Benita. Now we have a virtual memento as a token of gratitude. Can we have it on the screen, please? This is presented to Mr. George T. Thomas with deep appreciation for your visionary guidance and in grateful recognition for your enduring commitment throughout this webinar. We thank you for spending your valuable time with us. Thank you, sir. Participants, that the feedback form is provided in the chat box. Please ensure that you fill the feedback form to issue the certificate. Thank you once again, all the participants and faculties present here to join us on this webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you, Deep, once again from my side to take so much pain and be with us for such a long time. It's already 1 hour 45 minutes, and so much patient audience students are also attentive in this evening. And thank you, Naren sir, for joining with us and enriched with so many questions to Deepu, because that's why it makes a lot, because the students will be thinking in that side when you ask the questions. And thank you all my students for such coordinating the program. They were really, I was not well, so all the effort were taken by the students. So really appreciating all of them for their efforts for coordinating this program. Thank you, Deepu. Thank you, Narayan sir, and all my students.
Thank you very much. It's always a great pleasure to listen to people with so much experience. We learn so much from their experiences. It's always a pleasure. And I think we should listen to these people with a lot of experience, especially like Mr. George, with a paper and pen in hand, so that the moment you think of something, you can write it down and then ask questions for that. It makes learning so much more interesting. Thank you, Mr. George. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Narayan. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, everybody, for staying up late as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Deepu. Bye.